I saw this article in the Wall Street Journal entitled Texas Tax Advantage is all about individuals, not business taxes." And the general thesis of it is all these, businesses moving from California to Texas, Oracle, HP, etc., Tesla, they're not going to experience anything less in terms of business tax. It's all about their executives who are going to experience the benefit. And to be fair, they also say that employees have a lower cost of living here. So I know a little bit about this because I worked in private wealth management both in California and Texas. And when I was in California, the last couple of years, it seemed like all I was doing was advising people what their tax situation might be like if they moved outside of California. Back then Texas wasn't as popular. It was more like you would go to Nevada was popular because it's right next to California. But now Texas is the popular one for all these Californians, including myself. And I think the article kind of gets it wrong in a number of ways, and I just wanted to kind of go over that. So the article's right. If you look at the taxes that businesses pay in California versus Texas, just the businesses themselves, they might be fairly equivalent. And here's what I mean. So, California taxes corporations at a much higher rate. Texas doesn't have a corporate income tax, but it does have a gross receipts tax. California LLCs would flow through to personal income. So, if you're an LLC, you're going to pay a much higher tax rate because all that income goes to your personal taxes, whereas in Texas, you're going to be limited to the gross receipts tax, which is likely going to be less, and there is no state income tax for individuals. So, for people with LLCs, this article is probably not correct at all, and that's a lot of businesses. Tesla and all those companies, they're corporations. They're probably Delaware corporations, although I don't know offhand. That's just where a lot of publicly traded companies incorporate. And, in those cases, it might be right. But here's something that the article completely misses is, the individual income taxes and the effect to the corporation of businesses in general on that. And number one, in a post-COVID environment, what a lot of businesses are going to benefit from moving to Texas is, a huge tax that businesses pay is in terms of property taxes. And, in California, it's not necessarily as easy to avoid that by having your employees work from home, because in certain areas it's just so expensive to live that certain employees can't afford as large of a house with an office and things like that. So as businesses move towards having a lot more of their employees work from home, that's going to be a lot more attractive in Texas, where your average worker can afford a nice house with possibly an extra room or an in space for an office and things like that. And businesses aren't going to have to pay tax on the office space that essentially workers are taking over or workers are providing for themselves. And that's an interesting dynamic in all this post-COVID environment is, how much businesses are going to transition out of providing office space and paying for it. Well, that's going to be a lot easier than in Texas than in, high cost of living states like California, New York City, places like that. And then the individual, just the lack of tax on the owners of a business, at the publicly traded company level, which this article talks a lot about, your Oracles, your Teslas, etc. Well, you could make the argument that the business taxes are the same, but for most companies, if you move your company from California to Texas and you're an LLC and suddenly you're not paying any state income tax, and the only taxes you're really paying as an individual are based on your house, which you can control in a number of ways because you just don't have to have as expensive of a house, you can really see the overall business taxes shrink. So say, you have two businesses that are an LLC that are making a net profit of, $5 million in California versus Texas. Well, in Texas, that owner of that LLC, they're not paying state income taxes on that income at all because it's a pass-through. And the only state income taxes they're really paying is dependent on the size of their house. So it is a huge difference for businesses overall, and businesses do have a competitive advantage by moving to Texas, because that business owner can take part of those tax savings and reinvest it in their business in order to grow. So what you're starting to see is, 5 years ago, what you were seeing is California business owners would move to Nevada or somewhere else right before they sold their business. Now you're starting to see whole businesses move, and the publicly traded companies are, one aspect of that. But what you're also seeing slowly but surely is business owners are moving their residents to another state, and they're slowly moving their entire business to Texas. And you're just going to see more of that over time. Now, California, are they going to, go bankrupt in a year? No. And I've always said that. People always think California's going bankrupt. It's not. Number one, you've got Silicon Valley, and there's such a wealth of industry there between investors, attorneys, CPAs, all the different tech people who consultants for tech companies, and that ecosystem of tech. It is moving to Austin, and there's an ecosystem here as well, but it's just not the same, and that's not going to die overnight. The other thing is, Los Angeles is still a major financial center. It's not as big as New York City, but it's certainly bigger than anywhere else, and that's not going to change overnight. And there's still gigantic industries in California. What you're seeing is, middle-class people like myself, we weren't going to be able to afford a home in California, so we moved to Texas, where it's just a lot easier to afford the home we wanted. Not everyone's as lucky. I mean, if you're tied to a sales job, say like a real estate agent or something like that, it's harder to move because all of your business is in California. So not everyone is as lucky and able to move like I was, but you are starting to see a lot more people move. So, the article, it just struck me to say that, there's not really a business tax difference is different. One of the points the article makes also that I think is true is that the regulation environment in California is also catching up with them. A lot of companies, ultimately the choice for the move wasn't just about the taxes, because ultimately, you charge more for that, and that works itself out to some extent. But it's about the stifling regulation. Elon Musk is the biggest example, and he's talked a lot about that, how they were going to shut his plant down during COVID. And so that's why I think he started thinking about moving, and you're just going to see more of that. The regulation in California and states that have high regulatory environments is also what's driving, folks to Texas. And, candidly, I'm skeptical. I think in 20 years, Texas is going to look a lot more like California, just because so many of Californians have moved here. But we'll see what that's like over time. I hope Texas keeps its attitude of low taxes and low regulation, but you're already just starting to see a little more regulation over time in Texas, and maybe that's natural as more business moves here. I don't know. But my point is there's definitely a large tax advantage in Texas versus California. There's also a large regulatory advantage relative to California. You're not going to see all the wealth disappear from California overnight, and it's going to be a very wealthy state for years to come, just building on itself from, basically post-World War II, when it started to get economically very wealthy. That's not going to disappear overnight, but there is going to be a lot of wealth that's going to move out of there over time. There's just no question about that. So California versus Texas.